So, we will go on to the news that dropped earlier this week, or was it yesterday?
Yesterday.
Yesterday. Baylor named, unsurprisingly, Blake Shapen as a starting quarterback for the 2023 season. Of course, this was with the news that Mississippi State transfer and I believe Lubbock Coronado quarterback Sawyer Robertson transferred in, was hoping to push Shapen in spring. By all accounts, very much doing that. I don't want to say it was a toss up, but it did give them maybe something to maybe think about. But Shapen threw for 2,700 yards last year, 18 touchdowns, 10 picks as a sophomore. Of course, getting named the starter in the spring over Gary Bohannon the year before. And first, I'll go to the senior college writer. What were your thoughts on that? Was it surprising? Was it not? I don't know. What are your thoughts on Blake Shapen, just overall, I guess?
Yeah, not at all surprising. Didn't have to go change anything in the magazine, which was nice.
Yeah. That's the best
but like we look at Baylor last year and we talk about the offense and what Blake Shapen didn't do. They averaged more points in 2022 than they did in 2021 when they won 12 games.
Yeah.
If you look back on that 2021 season, the last 7 games of the year, Baylor went 6-1 without scoring more than 31 points in any of those games.
Sure.
That's the year they won 12. They beat Texas with 31 points. They lost to TCU with 30. Then they beat OU with 27, Kansas State with 20, Texas Tech with 27. They won the Big 12 championship 21-16.
Mm-hmm.
They won the Sugar Bowl 21-7. So they weren't putting up a bunch of points. It was the defense. And for me, when we're talking about Baylor, the biggest difference last year was they gave up over 30 points, I believe 6 times. And they had only done that one time in 2021, and that's the game they lost to TCU. And so they fired their defensive coordinator. They brought in Matt Pallage, from Oregon, who had been at Baylor before. Shapen was always going to be the starter. For me, the difference is going to have to be on the defensive side of the ball because they're not going to outscore teams. That's not what Dave Aranda, Jeff Grimes want to do. They want to win the game 28-20, and the defense is going to have to take a big step forward for that.
Yeah. Carter, what are your thoughts on Blake Shapen overall?
Well, I think a lot of it for me was a chicken and the egg situation because last year a lot was made about Baylor didn't have a receiver that went over 600 yards on the year. So it's like, okay, is that the quarterback's problem or is that the wide receivers not stepping up? And I think part of it was Baylor didn't account for the loss of Tyquan Thornton because Monterey Baldwin was supposed to be their number one guy. He is the most explosive athlete they have, but he was just constantly injured all the time. Doesn't have that big body type to be the number one wide receiver. And that's why they brought in Keytron Jackson Jr. from Arkansas, who they're really counting on to be this true number one option and downfield threat. I thought Shapen got a little bit too much of the blame, but what I didn't like was how he almost got worse as the season went on. So in these first 6 games, I was looking at the stats today. He was 68% completion percentage for 11 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. And then as we go in the last 7 games, obviously the back half of Big 12 and the bowl game, he was 59% for 7 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. So the numbers went down for sure. But I honestly love what they did bringing in Sawyer Robertson because they were left in scramble mode when Austin Novosad flipped to Oregon.
Right.
And then Kyron Jones, the backup last year, transferred. But Sawyer Robertson, I thought, was the perfect backup to bring in to push him because he is not better than Blake Shapen. So he's like, it's not going to be a situation where if Shapen struggles in the opening games, the fans are going to be like, Sawyer Robertson has to come in right now.
Sure.
But he pushed Shapen and was like, look, there is a little bit of fire under your seat here. And obviously he earned the job. So should have some confidence going into the year.
Yeah, we see this with quarterbacks all the time, right? Like they come out of the gates and they're game busters. Shapen completed 17 straight passes to start that Big 12 championship game, set a record. Coaches get film. Coaches get tape.
Sure.
I mean, we're in Dallas right now. Dak Prescott's the perfect example of that, right? Like, I think Shapen last year, did not adjust well to the adjustments that the defense has made about him. I think that's true for Jeff Grimes as well. The Baylor offense in general did not adjust well in 2022 for the differences they saw from 2021. We'll see if they can make more adjustments going into this year.
Yeah. I think one of the things that, and I was a victim of this too, when it came to Blake Shapen as decision maker, I do agree with Carter that I think it didn't help that he did regress as the season went along. Right now, was that because of the skill talent did not elevate itself, and by skill talent I mean more wide receivers. Guys like Richard Reese did come along as the season went along, but did it mean more of a plateauing because that was just the skill talent he had on the outside? The TCU game was a good example of that, where you saw moments where they were just one play away from like really icing that game and pulling off the upset and knocking TCU out of the playoff conversation. And a lot of Baylor fans, a lot of Big 12 just observers were like, man, if they just had a quarterback who like made one play better, a little bit like that. But to the point, the year before, when kind of when teams got kind of used to what they were doing with Gary Bohannon in the run game, Blake Shapen added something different, right? The ability to stretch the field a little bit. He doesn't have the strongest arm, but he has a good arm, and he has a more accurate arm than Gary Bohannon did. And just the ability to keep that horizontal game going and just kind of give the offense that different little passing element, all of a sudden, defense is like, what's happening, right? And so if they could, it really isn't about finding that all-conference necessary receiver, but it is just finding a reliable receiver, right? Finding that go-to guy, because now you have Richard Reese, who's going to need some help now, because everybody, like you mentioned, there's film on him. He's their game breaker on offense. So now it's like, okay, now that Blake Shapen's not going to be the focus of defenses, can he maybe step up and help Richard Reese, who's now becoming, we don't know if he's going to be that every down guy necessarily, but he's going to be the focus of defenses now.
Dave Aranda is a really introspective guy, and he has admitted, he talked to me about it, how, they tried to make 2022 exactly like 2021. Mm-hmm. Like, we won 12 games, let's do the exact same formula.
Right.
But he didn't have the dudes on defense to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They won close games and they won low-scoring games in 2021. That's how they got to 12 wins.
Yep.
They couldn't do that. They didn't have Terrell Bernard. They didn't have Jalen Petrie. They didn't have J.T. Woods on the defensive side. They were going to give up more points, and they didn't really account for needing to score more points. So they tried to keep doing the Abram Smith, Ebner, R.J. Sneed, like those kind of guys. They didn't have that talent. They couldn't get themselves out of the hole, and they just weren't able to outscore opponents. It's funny, when I was talking to Aranda, he talked about Indiana Jones and how, like, when you watch
he
it,
was. That's not shocking at all.
Well, there's a scene in the original Indiana Jones where he goes into that town. I can't remember. It's like Casablanca or one of those towns or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he sees this swordsman. He's got this crazy, cool, fancy sword. And he's doing all these tricks.
Yeah.
He's like, that's TCU. That's Oklahoma. That's Texas, where it's like, man, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Like, that looks dope. I want to do that. But you got a gun in your pocket.
right.
You just got to use that. Like, they are going to be that in the Big 12. Like, they want to be that bully, power, run the football, play really good defense.
Yeah.
They need to get away from what they were trying to do last year and just kind of get back to that.
It's a little bit like what Kansas State is, right?
Yes,
it's like Kansas State has the gun, right? And it's like, cool, you guys can do that, but Chris Kleiman won some national titles doing this hard-nosed, physical football for North Dakota State. So it's like, we got to do that if we're Kansas State and if you're Baylor as well.
Well, and I think the addition of Oklahoma State transfer Dominic Richardson really helps them do that. So that's going to really help spell Reese in the backfield. And then the two BYU offensive linemen, the Barrington brothers,
massive.
I'm very excited to see those guys reuniting with Eric Mateos, the offensive line coach, and Jeff Grimes, former offensive coordinator there. Mm-hmm. I thought Aranda did a really good job of changing up his strategy and going after the transfer portal a little bit more. And, like you're saying, realizing he can't just do the same thing over and over again in this new look Big 12.
Yeah. All right. So moving on, looking at their schedule a little bit before we move on to the next topic. Carter, you did this one examining Baylor's schedule as a whole. Again, go look at the whole piece on TexasFootball.com. We've done Houston, UTSA, Baylor, and I'm forgetting one. Or is that all? No, we've done 4. I'm trying to think.
Houston just dropped.
Houston just dropped. That is correct. So, yeah.
North Texas.
That was the first one we did. That was the first one. So, but sticking on Baylor, so I'm trying to figure out, like, we joke around in the office that Baylor, and Craven, you said this, Baylor's the team you know the least about.
Yep.
And not because we haven't looked up this team or that we haven't talked to people about this team, but just because we don't know what to expect from this team, right?
That's the better way to put it.
Right.
I don't know what to expect.
Right. You can watch them practice and you can just be like, but what happens when those jerseys are purple, right? What happens when those jerseys are red, when they go to, when they play UCF, right? Carter, you put together this, and just to break it down, we have biggest game, trap game, potential upset for all. We're going to have all FBS programs. I have a question about what you thought the trap game was. You have it down as UCF on September 30th. Mm-hmm. What was your thought into having that as Baylor's trap game?
Well, I put that as Baylor's trap game, one, because it's the first time they travel out to Florida, so changing time zones and going to – I think UCF is going to be the best new team in the Big 12 with Gus Malzahn, and the running game for UCF is really scary when you look at it. They averaged 228 yards a game last year, and a lot of that's because of the quarterback, John Rice Plumlee. You'll remember he was at Ole Miss, and then he is now making some headlines when he did that whole going from the baseball playoff game to the spring game.
Right.
He's a dynamic athlete, and I just think that Gus Malzahn's team is on a really nice trajectory, like going into the Big 12, where they're catching a lot of good momentum and stacking some 9-win seasons. They do have 2 new coordinators, but that almost makes it even more of a trap game because you're not going to know as much what to expect out of them.
Just for one, the offensive coordinator is still Gus Malzahn.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's
Like,
true. That's true.
You're hired to run Gus's offense.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. That is. I mean, that's fair.
And
Yeah,
I think the other reason that's a real trap game is it's right in between Texas and Texas Tech.
yeah.
You know, and
Those are
so
two-
the
yeah,
last meeting with
that's a good
Texas
point.
in a long time, you're gonna have to go to Lubbock, and anybody who can look at Baylor staff and looks at Texas Tech staff, there's a whole lot of overlap, right?
Yeah.
And so both coaching staffs really care about that when they beat the brakes off of Texas Tech in Lubbock last year in front of Patrick Mahomes, and so that's going to be a big game. Not only is it their first trip to Florida, it's their first trip away from McLean Stadium.
Yeah.
Like they play 5 of their first 6 games at home.
That's kind of crazy.
And so
I didn't even
that
notice
UCF
That's
game is going to be
crazy.
kind of a weird one for them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't even noticed that until looking at it just now. Yeah, the one that I like that you have for the potential upset, Carter, is Utah.
Agreed.
Because Utah, they have Texas State. They're going to be obviously massive favorites in their opener. Utah is like a great barometer for what I think this Baylor season's going to be, right? If they host Utah, who, for better or worse, they're going to have playoff aspirations, right? Yeah. They're probably definitely on the outside looking in, but they're definitely going to be one of the contenders in the Pac-12. And they just get waxed by Utah, a team that I think you mentioned it. Kyle Whittingham loves to play a physical brand of football, right? Mm-hmm. That's his style. And if they host Utah and all of a sudden Utah comes out 35-17 and it's like, oh, all right, what? Then I get a little worried, right? I'm not saying they have to beat Utah. I think they can. But if they come out and get shellacked by Utah inside McLean Stadium, it's like, ooh, what's going on with Baylor here? Because I think the brand that Utah plays is not necessarily the brand that lends it. They're not USC. They're not going to, go 4 verts. Lincoln Riley's not going to throw for 500 yards. And
it's Baylor's brand.
We're a game that can get away from them, right? That's not the brand they play. It's the brand that, if they come over and just say, hat on hat, boom, and they average 7 yards a carry, right? They're holding Richard Reese to 64 yards rushing on 20. It's like, oh, something's gone wrong.
It's like
here.
what BYU was that last year.
Right.
Like
that was the game where yes.
I remember texting you like late at night. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and be like, oh.
Yeah, right.
Like I was wrong.
Yeah.
Because I remember looking at Baylor last year and being like, yeah, they lose a lot of their skill position players and stuff, but they bring back their offensive line, they bring back the defensive line. They're just going to bully people and they'll figure it out.
Sure.
And they did not bully BYU.
No,
In fact, the opposite happened. And if you lose at your own game, you're in trouble. Like I watch a lot of MMA.
Yeah.
If you're a wrestler and you're getting out wrestled, well, you're in trouble because that's
you
the
got no
thing
plan
you
B.
do.
You said that a lot about Baylor last year too. Like
Yeah.
if you get bullied out of your own game, then you're in trouble.
And so if Utah comes into McLean and bullies Baylor, not just beats them, but bullies Baylor, there's some real trouble signs coming out of that game.
Well, I think I also had that game as a potential upset because as much as Utah is this consistent, Pac-12 force, back-to-back Pac-12 champions, they are kind of suspect in non-conference. Like last year, they dropped to Florida. 2 years ago, they started 1-2.
Yeah.
And then looking at their schedule these past 2 years, they've been 6-0 at home, but 3-3 on the road each of those seasons. So like Baylor getting them at home is a huge benefit. And like y'all are saying, it's going to be such a barometer for that year. And also like Cameron Rising, former Texas Longhorn, he's coming off a torn ACL in the Rose Bowl game. So
that's a good point.
He's missing a lot of, he missed spring ball, obviously. He's probably not going to be 100% during fall camp.
Yeah.
And they got to replace Clark Phillips III on defensive side too. So there's a lot of changing on going
Shout
on
out to
Utah
Cam
right
Rising, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Newberry Park, California is beautiful.
Yeah. And shout out to Jaquindon Jackson too.
Yes.
Running back for
Good
Utah.
I think he's going to be the number 1 back this year.
He's so good. He was so good in the bowl game last year. I'm glad that I'm glad that he's embraced the role change because obviously he was somebody who wanted to be a quarterback out of high school and he's embraced it, man. And he's been pretty
I remember
awesome.
being at Jaquindon's signing.
Yeah.
And a reporter from the DMN asked him like what he was going to play in college.
Yeah.
And he was so offended.
He was like
Because he was a quarterback.
Yeah.
And he had just like led them to a state title game. Probably could have won that game
Yeah, he's a damn
without a
good
Hail
one.
Mary. He had just torn his ACL a week before in the semifinals, right, and stuff. And so, but to see him kind of embrace that, we saw with DeMarvion Overshone at Texas, where when he was a recruit, he would bristle at the idea of playing linebacker. Like, I'm not a linebacker, I'm a safety.
Right.
But you get there for a couple years and you go, well, I'm trying to play.
Yeah.
You know, and I want to go make some money. And Jaquindon, I think like Rashawn Johnson,
Yes.
could be a
That's
dude
good
who
example.
gets drafted in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round and becomes a legit NFL, running back.
Yeah, I think so.